It is day 12 of Inktober, and today we are getting spicy. So there's no reference today, but I'll show you in the top left corner here what I'm aiming for. So spicy to me means one thing, and it means I love putting chilies, hot peppers, hot chutney, and sriracha, and all other hot sauces on all of my food. And so today I thought, well, there's only one thing I want to do, and that is sketch my favourite things. So I started off obviously with just creating a little chili. When we're drawing from our imagination, and when we just apply simple shapes, if we remember things in simple shapes, suddenly actually you might find you can do it. I know drawing from the imagination feels scary, but just remember it's not actually drawing from the imagination, it's drawing from memory, and it's remembering basic principles. So I'm drawing from my memory of clear shapes, and I'm remembering basic principles about where the shadows will be. So that's where I'm doing my hatching, and where the bottom of an object has to be. It's behind, this jar is behind the chili, so the bottom of it must be slightly above it on my page. And the same for the sort of tube of sriracha on the right. And just by clearly identifying simple shapes and keeping things simple, you'll find that you can draw from the imagination. I've done lots of videos here now about drawing like imaginary cities and things like that, and actually it's all the same. Even for things which are a lot more complicated than this, drawing from the imagination remains much the same. It is not imaginary, for me at least. It's all about memory, putting together memories creatively, but really about those shapes. One thing which can help, I talked about rules, and one thing that can help is identifying clear rules you can follow. So you might have seen me there just bring my pen down when I was starting to create the shadow. And what we'll do later is we'll work that out a bit more. So what we can do is we pop in our light source in the top left. And now I can trace down where my light source would go, where it would intersect all of these corners. And that simple act shows me where each of these shadows would end up. So all I have to do is trace down from the light, and then I can pop the correct position of the shadow. It's a really simple technique, really easy, and quite effective in creating that element of realism in our imaginary sketches. Then we just join up those little shadow shapes, and we fudge it a bit where it doesn't quite fit on our page and things like that. But basically, it feels authentic. At least it feels authentic enough for me. And again, all we're doing, therefore, is treating these shadows as a simple shape. So we are just creating a simple shape out of our shadows. Now, I'm moving on really from those shapes to a second stage where I'm trying to imagine kind of details I might want to add. And we actually will continue adding details. It's the nature of imaginary sketching, is that you'll see what happens, and then later and later you can keep adding more and more details. For now, I just wanted to make my jars feel a bit more busy, popping labels on them, popping a few little chilies on the bottom of the chutney jar, as it's going to be. And you know, we all know those kind of textures you get at the top of those squeezy jars of sriracha, trying to get that idea as well. I pop these circles on, they're not meant to indicate anything, just again keeping it busy. And I thought I'd put some dots on, which again don't indicate anything. They're just me trying to make it a little bit more interesting. And there's also a really key bit about still lifes, and that's getting your sort of table line, your horizon line, something which separates the floor from the wall. That just means these objects are no longer floating. It makes it understandable about what is going on. And with that, it's time to start applying our first layer of colour. So like normal, this would be what I call loose colours. So I'm just going to be picking colours I feel will work, which will represent my objects. So first, obviously, a bit of red for chili. Now I'm jumping across to blue for the jar because I also want some contrast in the scene. So blue is another primary colour. That means it will contrast really nicely with our bright red chili. And then to keep that contrast going, I'll make the label red. So these are the kind of thoughts you can have. A little bit of colour theory, just identifying what will be really contrasting colours. On to my next jar, well, the complementary colour, and therefore the most contrasting colour with blue, is orange. So I thought I'll use a bit of quinacridone sienna. That's a nice orangey colour. to pick apart this bottle, and hopefully what we're going to get by the end is a really bright contrast between the blue in the middle, the other primary colour on the left, and the complement of blue orange on the right. And then we've got a really simple colour scheme. We can keep building it up. I want to enrich these colours, so whilst the colours are still wet, I'm just using a little bit more colour to enrich them. Watercolours, of course, transparent and they dry quite light, so we want to enrich those colours. I also drag down some of the colour into this shadow. That, for me, makes shadows more fun. Instead of being a flat sort of graphite grey or neutral grey, you can make the shadows feel like a bit of a reflection. So in my first layers, as well as just starting to enrich the colours and starting to get that sort of shadow going in places, also just starting to think about what's going to make the colours more interesting. Now, normally I split my colours into 2 stages. I do loose colours first, then bold colours. At this time, I'm actually going to sort of do 3 stages, and that's because this image is actually wanting quite rich colours to make it really pop. And so I'm waited for my first colours to dry. Now all I'm doing is coming back in and enriching them. If you try and make your watercolours really rich with one layer, then they can become overworked, too heavy, too thick. Instead, if you layer up your colours, you end up with that same richness, but you can keep that transparency, which is what makes watercolours different and makes them really quite magical. That's all I've done there. And now we're ready to move on to what I'd call normally the 3rd step, the sort of bold colours. And with the bold colours comes shadows. So hopefully you can see when I just neatly fill these geometric shadows over with a deep red, they feel like shadows. Even though it's just the same red, it feels like shadows because the value is increasing. Same here, as I increase the quinacridone sienna, this browny orange, it's just a layer of the same colour, but it feels like shadow, again, because the value, the darkness, the shade of this colour is increasing. Works again on this label with the red, and we can keep doing this around the image. This is adding bolder colours. The colours are more saturated, and they've also got a higher tone, because in watercolours, the white is getting lost from the paper. Now just using a little mix of indigo and quinacridone sienna to provide a more sort of neutral shadow colour in a few places, especially on the imaginary table, where just imagining that there's those reflected colours coming down, which are now underneath our shadow, but still lightly there. But also, you know, the shadow is going to be a bit more bland. If this is a white table, then the shadow is going to be white. Keep dotting around, adding a little bit more of shadow to a few places. And this is, for me, the fun of watercolours is just moving around, seeing where the balance is, seeing what's been lost, what needs to be added. And that is all I'm focusing on doing in this little scene. It's also partly the nature of sketching from imagination, is that you don't have a reference to work from. So you have to move around. You have to look at what has worked and what hasn't, what might be needed and what isn't needed. You can't just cheat by looking at the scene in front of you, be that real life or a photo. You can't just go, well, I know the exact things I'm going to do, unless you're very experienced, of course, and then you might know exactly what you're trying to achieve from your sketch at any one time. For me, I'm just moving around, enriching shadows here, dropping them back in other places, and now taking a little step back and going, what else is needed? And this is where I realised, you know what, it's never going to really stand out if this whole sky or wall is white. But what if I take another primary colour? So if I get basically a triadic colour scheme going here, triadic colour scheme where you have 3 primary colours or 3 secondary colours, and because they all contrast, because they're all bold, you end up with something which really stands out. And hopefully you can see that that little touch of yellow, because it contrasts so well with all the other colours going on, that little touch of, well, not a little touch of yellow, is it? That big touch of yellow has suddenly pushed everything else forward. It's suddenly made things pop so much more. I just want to add some texture. That's what I'm swirling my brush around for. And again, maybe a few little touches of yellow elsewhere. And again, now that we've got something else added to the scene, you might go back and identify that even more bold colours could be used elsewhere in your scene. So here, for example, I'm just going to come out and enrich the colours yet again. This is why I love doing that normal neat process. 5 steps for my ink and watercolour sketching. But if we're doing something totally from the imagination, we need to be a bit more flexible. You know, I'm still putting up my little headlines of the different steps, but hopefully you can understand that whilst we do have a process, working within that process, being flexible within that process will enable you to do a lot more than if you just sort of stick with it. Of course, want to do a few little splashes at this stage. You can tell when we're starting to do splashes that we're thinking we're pretty much there with our colours, because if we try and colour over the splashes, we'll lose the splashes and things. There are a few places that I found which needed a little bit of extra colour, but then basically done. Now, in the spirit of Inktober, I'm totally cheating again here, because I decided this would be a really fun one to apply some nice, vivid, illustrative lines. And so I'm getting out my Posca pens. Let's call it acrylic ink, but really it's acrylic paint in these Posca pens. I could equally have used some India ink or something like that on a bold pen, or even just use a bold fine liner to create these bold lines I'm doing now. And hopefully, again, you'll see, you know, behind all these watercolours, we lost a bit of that structure, didn't we? Because although watercolours are transparent, they still just take away a little bit from the lines that you put down with your nice fountain pen. But then we can come back in and we can just, you know, re-emphasize them. And especially in a bold illustrative image, really bold lines will create that nice effect. It's a bit cartoony, but that's what this sketch is all about. So that's okay. With Posca pens, the key advantage is that it's opaque. So now I can come in with my same primary colours. I can come in and produce blue, yellow and red lines. And these blue, yellow and red lines both fit the colour scheme of the watercolours, but they also stand out. They add more texture, they add more interest, which is something I was sort of trying to work out how to do. I can use this is a light blue, but I can use it in the shadows to provide little highlights. Instead of doing sort of white highlights, we can do light blue highlights. It fits our colour scheme, provides a bit more contrast. These little red splashes of sriracha, it's supposed to be coming out of the top of my sriracha bottle, I can enhance as well with that lovely bold pen. Now, something I normally don't do, writing on my art, because my handwriting's terrible. But today I thought my sort of cartoony rubbish handwriting would be all right. And there we have, we've got chili chutney and sriracha popped on the labels, and that does start to actually tell the story of what's going on here. You know, when I've done that, notice a few more touches might be needed just to really make the label stand out. And even the shadows could stand out just a tiny bit more with a few extra lines. But this is all just nitpicking, really small touches now to what I'm sort of pleasantly surprised by. Has turned out to be quite a fun little sketch. Something where I didn't really have a huge plan, and came in just being like, let's play, let's experiment. And for me, that's been the amazing thing about Inktober. Although I appreciate I've cheated here, this is hardly an ink-only sketch. Hopefully you can see the playfulness, the ideas, which we can just have fun with and explore when we're getting to do things, or being forced, in a sense, to do things which are not in our normal sphere. You can see at the beginning, remember I said I'll do some more playing with details later. This is exactly what I mean. So all I'm doing is going, this bottle's a bit boring. How can I use really simple illustrative touches? You know, simple shapes, circles, squares, bright, bold, triadic colour scheme colours. How can I use those simple things to make it more interesting? And actually, I think those little touches at the end were really effective. I then wanted to just enhance some of those shadows, get that geometric feel that I like using in my sketches, get that back in a few places, use my fountain pen to produce a few more little textures, a few more little touches. Right, again, a little bit of nonsense on there. So I put really hot stuff under the chutney, and I think I wrote best brand under the sriracha. And there you go. That is my scene done. And let's see what you've done. Do let me know in the comments, and give me some inspiration for tomorrow as well. So thank you everyone for watching my little sketching videos. If you enjoy my content, please do subscribe to my channel, because it makes me really, really happy. Thanks again.